Hello, my name is Jordy Izzard, and I am an Alumni Relations Officer at SAIS, and today's date is December 11th, 2012, and I am here with Nigel Ogilvie, who is actually a BA/MA, graduated from Johns Hopkins undergrad. Essentially in 1975 is when he finished his third year there. Then went to Washington, D.C. for his first year master's at SAIS, and then finished up his fifth year in Bologna, graduating in 1977. So we're so happy to be with you today, and we just have a few questions and wanted to kind of have a conversation with you. And why don't we just start with kind of what originally brought you to SAIS?
I think it's a somewhat different answer than a lot of students. My parents were English emigres. They were figure skating instructors. They had actually represented the UK in the 48 Olympics and the 47 Worlds and Europeans. But they came to this country to be in show business and to teach, and they ended up settling up in Baltimore. And I grew up on the fringe of Wyman Park, literally right across from Hopkins. There are a series of row houses that are directly across the park, and I was in that area. I used to play in the park. And I was aware that there was a university, but I never imagined that I might be going to that university. And so I was the only child, and my parents were very loving, and my mother gave me very clear instructions. You will apply to Johns Hopkins. If accepted, you will do the 3-2 program in international relations, and you will go to the School of Advanced International Studies in Washington. And being an obedient lad, I did all those things. That's how I ended up at SAIS.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. So that's pretty straightforward. And then let's go to when you were at SAIS.
Well,
thinking back at your year in D.C. and in Bologna, what do you recall from those years?
Well, I remember, I think we were all very excited. I was certainly very excited because we knew that, I knew that I was onto a good thing. I was into this master's program even though I was not yet even through my senior year. And it was nice to have that certainty about graduate school resolved early on. And I saw some of the colleagues at Homewood who were going through the uncertainty of what they would do in graduate school in their junior year and sometimes their senior year. Well, we were well on our way by then. I think the drawback was that we were very young. We were, on average, 20, 21 years old. And I think the median age at SAIS, Washington, was 26.
I think it still is, somewhere around there, yeah.
And we really had been given no preparation at all by the administrators of the ABMA program as to how this would differ from Homewood. And there were some really big differences. I think the most important, besides the age, so that the age difference was important, 5 years at the age of 21 to 26 is a long time. And individuals who were 26 and older had been out in the real world. They had an idea, they had a clearer idea of why they were coming to SAIS than we did. We knew that we were not meaning to speak for the others, but I knew that I was coming to SAIS because it was going to give me a master's degree very soon after my undergraduate, and that it was a well-known and prestigious school. And it was in a major that I had chosen and was pretty happy with. So what we weren't prepared for, what I wasn't prepared for, was the distinction between the academic world that we had left and the policy world that we had come into. It is sometimes said that an undergraduate's most academically precocious year is the junior year. If the light bulb hasn't gone on by the junior year, then it probably is not going to go on. But if it has gone off, you've probably gotten excited about your studies and done some of your best work in your junior year before senior slump sets in. And of course, we never experienced senior slump because we went from this I think all of us had a pretty good junior year, and then all of a sudden we were in first year of SAIS, and time management skills became even more critical than before. But we weren't prepared for the policy orientation, and it was not the same as a university environment. I think that was the big surprise to me when I went to Bologna in year 2, that it was more back into the White Tower, and it was back into a more academic environment, which I was flourishing in. I had a great academic year in my junior year, and I had a great academic year in my in Bologna. I had more adjustment problems in terms of being happy. I was able to do the work, I was able to get good grades, but I wasn't as happy in my studies in the first year, and I think it was just an age difference.
Interesting. Anything else you remember? Any professors or anything going on in Washington at the time?
Well, I was pretty short of money, and the cost of housing was ugly. And one of my colleagues in the ABMA program, Dominique Thorman, whose father was a professor of French literature at Goucher College, and I were good friends at Hopkins undergraduate, and we would commute from Baltimore to Washington and back. Did that for about a month and a half, realized it was untenable, and we got a bedroom. We rented a bedroom in a group house at 14th and Rhode Island. That lovely 19th century house no longer exists, unfortunately, but it's right at the intersection of 14th and Rhode. Was right at the intersection of 14th and Rhode Island, and the Barrel House liquor store is still around the corner and is still there. And also, in those days, that was what we could afford, and we would spend about 3 nights a week there, and then drive back to Washington, to Baltimore. It was very much on the urban fringe at that stage, and there were lots of women of the night and the day. And I'll never forget when I had it was September of 1975, and it was pretty muggy. It can be hot and muggy in September, late September. And I was a European Studies student, and one of the drawbacks, I don't know if it's still the case, one of the drawbacks of being a European Studies major, you were supposed to declare an area major, an academic major, and international economics, 3 majors. So my area that I had declared was European Studies, run by David Kaleo, who really took a perverse pride in making it the most difficult major of all of them, insofar as I think we had 3 comprehensive examinations that we had to pass to show that we had essentially memorized Western European diplomatic history from 1815 to 1945. And so I remember there was this immense reading list, probably as tall as that book cabinet, that we were supposed to get through for these comprehensive exams. Well, no time like the present, so I jumped right in. And I remember sitting in this bedroom on the 2nd floor of this house near 14th and Rhode Island. Hot and sweltry, windows were open, and I was reading diplomatic history, which I developed a real aversion to. I just don't like diplomatic history. It doesn't capture my imagination at all. And I was reading something about the reign of Napoleon III, and he was offering his son or his daughter to an Italian king in exchange for a land deal that had to do with the provinces around Lombardy. And I heard in the background, boom shakalaka. The windows were open, and then it got louder. Boom shakalaka, boom shakalaka, boom shakalaka. Got louder and louder and louder. I eventually looked out the window. This is 1975. And there is a Lincoln Continental Mark IV with the top down. And it had a very tall, elegantly attired black man at the wheel with a big red brim hat and matching bright red trousers and a white open neck shirt and some really nice jewelry. And at the front of his Lincoln Continental, he had Mercury winged Victory with fluorescent lucite wings that were lit up. And in his passenger seat and behind him were 1, 2, 3 women who were, he was their pimp. And this was quite an orientation to Washington, D.C., as I am trying to get through this incredibly dense diplomatic history. Long story short was that I ended up actually failing my first comprehensive exam in European Studies. Now, this wasn't the classroom work, that was fine, but you had to find spare time to read and memorize all this stuff, and so I got discouraged, and I think the next semester I actually applied for a change in major from European Studies to African Studies, which was kind of hot at the time, and also hot at the time was Middle Eastern Studies, but we had a number of people arriving with no knowledge of Arabic, and how they were going to get through their language proficiency in 2 years without actually being in Arabia, in Middle Eastern countries to learn Arabic, I didn't know. But I spent exactly 2 weeks as an African Studies major, realized that I could not possibly remember the names of the various political leaders because I had no cultural nexus with Africa at all. I had never set foot on the continent. So within 2 weeks I was back into European Studies and slogging away. So happy story was, after a couple of vacations where I spent my spare time reading about this wretched European diplomatic history, I managed to pass my comprehensive exam.
Excellent.
So,
excellent.
What else comes to mind? We could not figure out why the Bologna returnees were so mellow. They were uniformly more happy-go-lucky about life than we were. And I've even heard that today. I've talked to some SAIS students who say, the ones who come back from Bologna seem to have a more balanced attitude. They don't seem to be as frenetic and as neurotic about their careers. So maybe it's just that they had a year in Italy to gain perspective, or they just weren't corroded by the neurosis of job hunting if you spend 2 years in Washington. It was tough finding jobs, in the mid-'70s. And I think all of us were I was nervous about it, and it was something that I really focused hard on. And one of your questions, and we can come back to this, was, because it's relevant to this question of getting ready for the job market, I think the biggest surprise for me in that first year in Washington was how easy it is to get involved in the policy debate. And I'm not just saying about international relations and diplomatic and foreign policy. I'm talking about budget policy and agricultural policy and all matters of policy that are dealt with by the Hill. And what I found useful was to actually volunteer for committees and subcommittees to do research on the Hill. And I wasn't paid, but I was able to quickly add several important paragraphs to my resume. Mm-hmm. And I think that was an important step in getting a summer internship in the executive branch that summer. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think what else I wanted to mention about... I think you should interview Lizzie Stork, mm-hmm. Lise Stork, S-T-O-R-C-K. Mm-hmm. I think she'll have a lot of similar and different perspectives.
We can certainly, and you can certainly come back, but actually while you're talking about the job market and sort of the anxiety around getting a job, tell us a little bit about what your career was like, and how it's sort of evolved from when you graduated to kind of where you are now, and was it what you expected?
I think overall my frustration with the field of international relations as it was packaged at Hopkins was that it was a subcategory of political science. And I wasn't that happy with modern political science as a social science because the jargon was awful. I was very happy with its close cousin, political theory, which was a study of the history of political philosophy. I got that. I found that very, very, very stimulating and rewarding and interesting. But at Hopkins undergraduate, we had a tenured professor of geography and environmental engineering who, after he was tenured, came out of the closet as a Marxist. and began teaching a very interesting course called Reading Marx's Capital. And it really focused on volume 1 of Marx's 3 volumes. Volume 1 is the only one that Marx actually finished, and then volumes 2 and 3 were put together by Engels after Marx's death. And he had a marvelous approach to this because there were no exams or term papers. He said, what I will do each week is assign you some reading. I want you to read and then summarize in as much detail as you want. So it could be a 1-page summary or it could be a 5-page summary. But summarize the chapter that I've assigned to you or the pages that I've assigned to you. And if you do that regularly and hand them in on time, I will give you 3 credits of A. That's a deal. So I remember writing these summaries in the Hutzler reading room at Homewood and really getting turned on by the argument. I mean, it's a phenomenally powerful work. And from that point on, I didn't become a Marxist, although I did once ask the professor what his goal was by offering this course to undergraduates. And he said 5%. He was an Englishman. And I said, 5%? He said, yeah, if I get 5% believing in the sort of things I've asked them to read, then I'll be successful. And many years later, I ran across him in Hamden, which is a working class community across from Wyman Park. And I had purchased my first home there, even though I was working in Washington. I had a piece of 4x8 plywood on my shoulder, which is pretty heavy. I was doing some renovation work in the house. I'm walking along the street in Hamden up to the house, and he lived in Hamden. He lived his own credo. And I saw him, and I said hello. I'm carrying this big piece of plywood, and I said, I'm still trying to sort out the exact definition of surplus value that Marx had. He said, you don't have to worry about the definition. You've got it on your shoulder. So that reading Marx's Capital made me interested in political economy. Mm-hmm. And I never really wanted to pursue the foreign service, international diplomacy side. I was much more interested in matters of economics and applied economic policy, and that was kind of sealed the summer of '76 when I had an internship at the Department of Commerce. This is after my first year at SAIS in Washington. Mm-hmm. And as an intern, we got to go to the Treasury Department to hear some speakers, and there was a man who was, a mid-level political appointee, and this would have been in the latter stages of the Nixon administration. And he delivered a compelling 45-minute lunchtime seminar on political economy. I walked out of that meeting at the age of 22 and said, I want to be a political economist. And so ever since then, I really wanted to work for either the Treasury or the Federal Reserve. That was hard to do because I was coming from SAIS, and the only place in Treasury you could get a job was in the Office of International Affairs, and there were about 30 applicants for that. And Federal Reserve wasn't interested in SAIS graduates as a general rule. So when I was in Bologna, I had the benefit of having 2 passports. I had the U.S. passport, but my parents were English, so I also had a U.K. passport. Mm-hmm. And I checked with the U.S. consulate, who said that I could use my U.K. passport to work in England, provided I used my U.S. passport elsewhere. And so I used my U.K. passport to present myself to the U.K. job market in the field of banking, and managed to get a good offer from an investment bank. Mm-hmm. And they put me through the Chase Manhattan Credit Training Program, and I learned a lot of accounting and other skills that I didn't have at all, that were very, very useful. I think that that's one of the pieces of advice I would give any SAIS student, is that if you expect that you might end up in the private sector at some time, some essential accounting and financial skills are really invaluable, if only to help you through the interview.
Practical skills, yeah.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, there are plenty of SAIS graduates who've gone on to, wonderful careers without that. I don't think Timothy Geithner ever had too much accounting. I don't know, but because he's mostly in the private sector, and whether he picked up some on the side or not, I don't know. But
and then where did that take you after that?
After a year working in an investment bank in London, I discovered that I was not a banker.
Okay.
I'm a would-be academic, and I enjoyed investment banking as an academic exercise, but I was not a deal maker. And they really reward you for being a deal maker. And the reason I wasn't a deal maker was that I wasn't really that greedy. I mean, I'm not trying to put down the profession, but if you talk to a lot of people who work in investment banking, they'll say, you know, there are some great people in the field and there are some real jerks. And I think to be happy in that field, you really have to be motivated by making a lot of money, and I just wasn't motivated by that. Mm-hmm. So I had been happy in the civil service during my brief internship. After about a year, I decided it wasn't for me, and I figured that it's better to be unemployed at 25 than 40. Mm-hmm. So I quit and didn't have a job. Came back to Washington, and I remember I was having trouble. I had an internship at the World Bank, which was just lucky because a SAIS colleague of mine who was already at the bank wanted to move from her existing section to this new section in East Africa, but she couldn't get released by her existing section, and she needed a trusted person who would occupy that slot until she was ready to move into it. And it was a great deal. So she forwarded my resume. I got hired on the understanding that when she was ready to be released from her section, I would disappear. And that worked out surprisingly well. But it took a while to find a good opening, but I found one at the Treasury's Banking Bureau as a research assistant. I spent 17 very happy and productive years there, got my second master's degree, got my CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst, and then after 17 years at the Treasury in a variety of different assignments, I had become a root-bound potted plant. I needed to do something else. I was about 41, and I eventually, I tried to, go to other agencies. I had a couple of offers, but it just wasn't working for me. I had to actually leave town. And I was given an offer to go work for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and I took it. And I ran away from home and spent 3.5 years in San Francisco, worked very hard, established a new name for myself, and eventually transferred back here after I'd been away for 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. I do find it's useful to sometimes leave Washington and come back. That's my experience, because it's a funny environment here, and sometimes you can allow the corrosive nature of the politics to get you down.
How does it feel to be back?
Great.
That's great.
But this is this is my fourth tour of duty. So I came to Washington for the first time when I was leaving Homewood and coming to SAIS, and then I went away to Bologna. Mm-hmm. I came to Washington a second time when I came back from Europe after 3 years, and 2.5. And then I left Washington with the Treasury to go to the Atlanta Bureau of the Treasury's Banking Bureau. And then I came back, and then I left Washington to go to San Francisco, and then I came back. So this is fourth tour of duty.
Where are you going next?
Probably retirement. And I'll probably stay here.
That's great. Well, in thinking about your illustrious career, I mean, you've done so many different things, which is great. In thinking about students today, what advice might you have for them? You gave a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think.
What else would you
sort of impart? You'll notice up there's a picture of the Dalai Lama. Mm-hmm. He addressed the SAIS commencement about 10 or 11 years ago, mm-hmm. and I was fortunate to be able to witness that address. And I think his words were as valuable then as they are maybe now. He told the students, the graduates, that some of them would go into the private sector, some would go into government, some would go into nonprofits, some would go into the military, some would go into NGOs, and he said, and all of those choices are fine, provided they come from your heart. So I do think it's important, if you can find a passion, that you can make cash flow to follow the passion. Mm-hmm. And I understand also that, that advice of follow your passion has the caveat that when you're very young, I think the average student needs some guidance and some discipline, possibly, administered from an external force. You know, my parents were teachers. Their students loved the discipline they brought and that they gave the students on the skating surface of the skating rink. And my mother tried to do the same thing with me because I needed kind of a kick in the pants. I needed some goals to be articulated because I wasn't going to necessarily articulate them myself. So early assistance from others in goal setting, which can then be revised down the road, I think are good. But certainly it was up to me to gather. My parents never told me to gather accounting and finance skills. Those were things that I got on my own because I sensed that they were important and I wanted to understand. And I do not regret my time in the private banking world at all because I learned so much in a very short period. I also learned what I was not supposed to be doing and got a second chance to really follow my passion, and I've wanted actually to work in the civil service since I was about 15. And I wanted to work for either the Treasury or the Fed, and the fact that I was able to spend the first half of my career in the Treasury and the second half of my career in the Fed has been extremely rewarding.
That's
so,
great.
Happy guy. Super.
Well, we really appreciate your time, and thanks so much for doing all that you've done for SAIS and the world. And
I don't know how much I've done for the world or for SAIS.
You've done
I've
a lot for both.
I've certainly, I got a lot out of SAIS. I got a tremendous amount out of Hopkins generally, and I think you're doing very good things to do this outreach and make the alumni office a really, an integral part of our lives.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay.